Alright, welcome back everyone to PHP video tutorials. This is lesson number 5 or lesson number 6 if you include the installation guide. I hope you guys have read all the study guides and read all the links that were in with the study guides and followed all the lessons up until now, because if you haven't, you may struggle a little bit with this lesson. So yeah, go back and do that if you haven't. If you have, you're ready to do this. So we're going to follow a map, so it's going to be quite easy, and if you get stuck, you'll be able to say I'm stuck on this part, and I'll be able to help you in the forum, or other people will be able to help you as well. So it's going to make things a lot easier. So we're going to look at the map ski, and we'll do that now. Alright, so just open up the study guides directory and open up the map in Windows Photo Gallery, and we'll get started on this. Windows Photo Gallery, and we'll zoom in, and it's just a map. Alright, it's kind of a weird looking map with some crazy stuff on there, but this is how I like to think. I like to think in pictures because it slows you down if you think in words. Think back to the ancient times when they used to draw on the walls. It's what we've done for thousands of years, and we all of a sudden made up this thing called writing, and it slowed us all down a little bit, I reckon. It also helps with a few things, but pictures are good to think in. Alright, so here you can see we're going to start at the first country and work our way around, and we're going to look for Curly's gold, and we will find it. Curly, we'll take your gold. So the first thing we have to do is remove the add, edit, update and delete actions from post controller. So let's do that right now. Open up post controller and remove those actions. It feels good to delete stuff. It always feels good to make your code look streamlined. So we'll just remove that, and you can add those in when you create the front end to this content management system for your client. We won't be doing that in this course. You'll have enough knowledge to be able to do that by the end, so that's cool. Alright, so let's go back to the map and see what we have to do for part 2. We have to move all the helpers and components into app controller, which is quite simple to do. We just grab helpers and components, cut that out, go to app controller. We'll remove this comment here. We won't need that anymore, just filling in room. Just paste it over the top, and because our controller inherits from app controller, we now have access to those properties in there, so all those helpers and components will be included in our controllers. Let's go back to the map and check this out. We can create a protected post controller find post method that redirects and displays error if no post is found. This will just make things a little bit tidier for our application as well, and we'll stop repetition because we'll be finding posts in different parts of our application, and if we create a method that does this, it will save us time. Let's come down here and create a comment, and I like to create this comment, and I just like to call it protected. This is where we'll keep our protected methods below this comment here, and we'll just start it out, and we want to create it, and it's called find post, and we'll say ID equals nullsy for the parameter. We'll just get some room so you guys can see that. Remove that as well. Alright, so let's create a variable called post, and we want to hold in a post, so you talk to the post model, use the find method, and we want to find the first post. Alright, we throw in some conditions, and of course conditions takes an array, and we just got to put in the model name, the column we want to search on, equals sign, ID. So that should make sense to you. You're all programmers. I'm just going to rip out a post with that ID, and we want to say if empty post. We want to do a session flash message and just say post not found. Alright, and then we want to, we've got to put a full stop on there. And we also want to do a redirect. So we'll do this redirect, and we'll redirect back to index. And I'm just throwing in a couple more parameters in there. Null will just make it so there's no header, like we could send back a 404 message in the header or whatever we wanted to. And I've set true, so it'll just exit after that. But if all goes well, we just want to return the post. So we just return post. And now we just want to use this method where we can use it. So for the view, it would make sense to use it in there. So let's set up a post variable. and we'll say this, find post, and of course we want to find the post by the ID that's coming in here. So we'll grab that, and we just want to set it inside here, so we can change this. Okay, that was actually getting the post there, but we don't want that anymore, so we'll remove that. We'll put a compact around this. Now this is a special function in PHP. It will compact our variables that are inside this function, alright, and send them to our view. Alright, so it's going to grab that array that we get back from find post and put it in there. Let's test this out. Let's go to our application, and because we're using the admin methods and we're going to be using admin routing, we have to type in admin there, and we'll say admin posts, and we'll just click on view, and that all seems to be working. What if we remove the ID? We should get redirected back, and we do, so that's pretty cool. Come back to our application, and we'll set this up for our edit as well. So let's just grab that, copy, come back down here for our edit. We'll throw this in up the top here. Oh, we'll go underneath the ID where it checks for the ID, and we'll just come down in here, and we want to pass this into this data parameter. Alright, it's a special variable that holds the post data for our forms, so we can set that in there. So we'll just say post, and now if we go back into here, we click on edit. Alright, it gets all that data, which is great, and if we remove the ID, we should get redirected back. Alright, so that's pretty cool. So if there's no this data, it's going to grab that data from our post. And when we post data, of course, there's going to be this data, so it's not going to grab that data and put it into the this data parameter. Should all make sense to you guys? Let's keep moving along. So we've created that. The next thing we want to do is create a lists method for all our lists. So we repeat a bit of code in this controller, which doesn't need to be repeated, like here in the edit action there, and here in the add action here as well. So we can just get that, cut it, come down here, create another protected method. I'm creating them as protected so we can't get to them from the address bar as well. Alright, so they're not actions, they're actually just methods inside here. And we'll call this lists, and we don't need any parameters. Just paste that code in there. Now we can just run that, and we're going to save some more code in our application, so we're making it dry. Just run that method like so. We want to run it here as well. This, oops, make sure you got the underscores there. Lists. And we'll just come back into our application, and we'll click on edit, and we'll just see if we get any errors. If not, all is working. Yeah, it's all working. We haven't got any tags or statuses set up yet in our tables, but it would have thrown an error if we were getting an error there. We'll click on new post. Yeah, so that's all cool. Let's go back into our map again and check what else we have to do. We have to create a page title property for all our actions. Makes our app more user-friendly having titles for our pages. So we'll just come in here and we'll do the first one. We'll say this page title. Again, if you want to see more information on this, you could always check out the API docs and read in App Controller or Controller and read about the page title property. Just sets a page title we can use in our views. So let's call this posts, and let's create another one down here just under the call there so we can have a page title. We'll say this page title, we want this page title to have the post title in it. So just throwing the key when you collect our data. Alright, when we do our find post method, it's going to return an array into this here, and that's the first key is post, and we want to get the title, which is the second key. And let's just come back into our application and click on view and just look up in our address bar up the top here, or our title bar. You can see Fight Night Round 4, so that's good. That's what we wanted. We'll come down here and we'll do the same for add. We'll create up a title, so we'll say this page title equals, and we'll say new post for that one. Come down here to edit, and we'll just make sure we're underneath where we get our post result back, and we'll set up this page title for this one as well. But on this one, we'll concat some stuff on the end there, so just edit string, whoopsie, concat post, and of course post key for the model name, and the column we want to get out is title. And now we've got an edit. So delete we don't need it for, so let's just check out the edit, see if that works. Edit post. Yep, that's all working. So all looks good to me so far. The first part of the map is done. It should have all made sense to you. If not, read those study guides again and that we did in the first 4 lessons. But we're ready to move on to creating a component now. So I'll meet you guys there. Alright, so now it's time to create the redirect component, and it's just going to be a package of knowledge that's going to basically redirect the user and set up the flash messages. So it's not going to be in our controller, all this redundant code. We can easily move that and port that into a package of knowledge that all controllers can use and we can use in other applications. And that's what you want to do. You don't want your controllers to have heaps of methods in there. Alright, it's okay if they have heaps of actions because they may need them, but when you start putting in lots and lots of methods that have nothing to do with interacting with the model, you want to create a component. So let's do this. Let's create a new file called redirect in the components directory. So we just name it the name of our component, redirect, and we just want to start up PHP, and I want to create a new component. And it's going to be called redirect, and it's going to extend object, and we're going to pass in a controller instance, and we're just going to set that to null to begin with, but we will talk about that in a minzy. So let's go back here and check this out. Include session component using redirect components property. So inside the redirect component we need to set that property up and include the session component because we're going to need access to it. So we just say var components, and we just give it an array, and we include the session component. Now we'll have access to that inside our custom component. We'll just do a little bit of a space there as well. Let's go back to our map and let's read the next thing. Create a redirect component initialize method and pass in a reference to the instantiating object. In this case, it's our post controller. So we can easily do this. Let's just jump into our custom component, create function. Of course, we've got to call it initialize, and we want to pass in a reference, so we're going to throw an ampersand so it's compatible with PHP 4, and then we can fill in our controller property or class variable, and we can set up the value of the reference of our instantiating controller. So now we have set that up, we can set up some settings, which will be the next step. Very simple. Create a redirect component settings property for warning and successful flash message layouts. We can also pass in a config param that will allow us to have customized settings and customized layouts inside our controller. It'll all make sense when you see it all working. Yeah, this may not make sense to you completely, but just follow along right now. So let's first thing we want to do is create that property settings. So let's just say settings, and we'll say array. Now we can use it down here. And we're going to use an array merge, which just merges 2 arrays together. So we're going to have our default values, and we'll merge on the config param. So we'll say for success, we want to have a success layout, and for warning, we want to have a warning layout. And we'll pass in the config value there. So let's just pass in that extra parameter, config, which we'll be able to change in outside our controllers. So that looks pretty good. Let's also just do a little bit more here. Let's set up a couple more properties here for success equals this settings. Just make our component a little bit easier to understand, having these properties set up, and give it a bit more functionality. This settings, warning. Now if you can't tell what I'm doing right here, I'm just setting up a couple more properties that have the value of settings. It'll make it easier to type these out as well throughout our component, and will also allow us to change things on the fly in our actions a lot easier inside our controllers. So let's come in here and let's set them up. So we've got one for success. Just default it to null. And we'll say var, we'll say warning. Alright, so now we've set up all that stuff. Let's take a look here and see what we have to do. We have to create a couple of redirect methods. Alright, one's going to be for successful messages, the other one's going to be for warnings, and we'll do that right now. Alright, so let's set up this method here. So we'll just create it, we'll call it flash success, and we'll throw in a parameter for message, and we'll throw in one for URL. That is not required, it could default to null. And we'll just set up a set flash message, and we'll make it the value of the message that we pass in. And we just want to set up the layout here that we're going to use, and our layout for this message will be the this success layout. So it'll be named success. I'm just using this class variable here to do that, and we just want to say if not empty URL, then we'll do a this redirect. But if instead of just going off this, we're going to have to use the instantiating controller that we're passing. We have a reference to, so we can access it through this controller. Alright, so we can say this controller redirect, because if you look here, our component doesn't extend a controller, it extends objects, so we didn't have access to that method. So that's why we're passing that in. We have access to the methods of it, and we'll throw in URL here. And that's much better. So now what we want to do is just copy this, create another one called warning, and we want to set this as warning, like that. And we also want to go back into our controller just quickly. We also, if you look on our map, we're going to have to create one for ID empty. So we'll grab some logic out of here, scroll down, grab this out of here, copy. We'll just, yeah, you can even cut it out, we'll copy it out. Come in here, create a function, and we'll call this ID empty. And of course, have to pass in the ID, paste that in there. And we want to check the controller, this data. Invalid post, we don't want to use that anymore. We'll use this flash warning. Just run our method we just created, a invalid ID. And we will redirect. We'll throw in ID and URL in here. We'll give that an URL as well. And go in here. And we'll just say invalid ID, and we'll say please check your link. Hello, I'm just jumping in here because I did a little bit of a boo-boo. I didn't build these layouts on camera, so I'm just going to do that now. So just jump into your lesson files directory that came with this lesson, and just grab out the success and warning layouts, copy those, copy, and jump into your application, so C, Cake CMS, views, layouts, and just paste them in there. And we'll just take a look at one of them. So we'll open up the success one, open with E, and you'll see that it's just got a div tag around it that's got style sheets applied to it when we add on our interface later on in the course. And we're just using content for layout, and that will display our message that we're sending back to the user. So in our redirect, whatever's sent back in here will be put into this variable here. So I hope that all makes sense. Continue along. So that all looks good now. Our first component is donezies. Now we just got to include it into our application. So we just come into app controller, and we can just throw that on there. So let's just go here, say redirect, go into our post controller and start to remove stuff we don't need anymore. We can just run our ID empty method there now. ID empty takes two parameters, the ID and the address we want to, or the URL we want to go back to, action index. Come back down here, we can remove that now. We can use this redirect, and we'll say flash success. And we'll throw in post saved. We may change these messages a little bit as we're going along, but that'll do for now. And we will just do an array here, and we'll pass back to the action view And I want to throw in just a variable on that view so we can pass in that parameter of the ID and allow us to go directly to the view. So we just do a comma there and say this post ID, oopsie, ID, so it's just going to have the ID value of whatever the post was saved as, or else we'll do this redirect, and we'll throw a flash warning to the user. Could not save post. So we'll just leave it like that, and we will move along. So this one here, we can change that to this redirect ID empty, ID array action index save. We'll just grab this one. Copy, saved, could not save post for that one. Come down here, do this redirect ID empty, ID array action. Oopsie, missed the A on action. It's caction. And we'll say index, and we will get that one. Oh, actually, we'll just do this ourselves. This redirect flash success. Say post deleted. Say array action index. Come down here, we can get rid of this. We can say this flash warning. We'll say post not found. Array action index. So this should all make sense to you guys. Pretty simple stuff. And we'll just clean this up a little bit as well. Clean all that up. Clean all this up. Alright, remove all that. All of this. Get rid of that. It's kind of fun doing this. This is just button pressing. And this one. And that looks good. Alright, so doesn't look too bad. Let's test some of this stuff out. So let's come back here and do a save. We can see that that all works. Come back to posts, and we can click on say view. Yeah, whatever. If we remove an ID, yeah, that's all good. If we click in a new post, we don't put in a title or anything, we just submit it. Yeah, could not be saved or could not save post. Maybe we should change that to post could not be saved. Get rid of that. Put a D on the end. Maybe we say please try again. Please try again. Just copy this, copy, and go into here, paste that in there. Post deleted, so that looks pretty good. How about we say post could not be found.
Hello, I'm just jumping in to do some corrections to the post controller. First thing I want to do is add B to here, so it makes sense and it's in English. Post could not be saved. Post could not be saved. And I also want to make sure that we're using our redirect component here. We haven't got access to flash warning directly off this controller. We have to get it off our redirect component. So I'll say redirect next. So continue along.
Quite happy with that. now. So that looks pretty good. So let's move on to the next part of our map. You may have noticed that we didn't do the last step in the map. That's because we already did it. We already set up the success and warning properties at the start of the lesson. So that's all dunesies. Let's do, I guess we have to take a look at the HTML first before we begin the next part, so we'll do. Alright, so let's take a look at the blog HTML file. It'll be in your lesson files HTML file, and it'll be the blog HTML file. So let's zoom in here a little bit with Firefox and check this out. So we've got some list view and some expanded view action going on, and that will allow us to expand these results and minimize them. It'll allow for better user experience, and they'll feel like they're customizing their experience a little bit. We're not going to save any of this data in a database. We're just going to save it in a cookie. It's a lot easier to do it that way, especially for interface stuff. So that's the way we'll roll, and instead of putting all this logic into a controller on its own, we will create the recording component, and it will just save all that stuff to a cookie for us. But we will need a controller to interact with it. Alright, we're just going to include this component inside a recording controller. So let's first do that. Let's first create the recording or recordings controller, and to do that we just fire up our command line cd into c wham www cake CMS, and we just want to run cake bake controller, and we want to create a recordings controller. So we don't want to create one for our models here, we just type in the name of it, and we don't want to build it, we'll say yes, we'll build it interactively, no we won't, and we don't want any of these methods in there. Looks okay to us, we hit yes. Test files, will bake them anyway. Alright, here we go. So let's create the recording component now. I don't know if I'm going to follow this map exactly when we create this. I'm going to do it a bit quicker, I guess, this time. So let's go into components and create it. We'll say it's called recording. So we'll do recording.php, and we'll just start up PHP again. Savey, and we'll say new component. And of course it's called recording, and we'll set our controller's default value to null, and we'll set up the initialize method. Initialize, we'll pass in the instantiating controller by reference, so we'll throw in the ampersand so it works with PHP 4. Also throw in the config, and we will set up the controller first. So we'll say controller equals controller, and we'll set up the settings, say this settings, and we'll say it equals array merge, and we'll throw in an array, and we'll set up one for expires. Alright, we'll say 7 days, and we'll throw on the config here. And I also want to set up a few more configurations for the actual cookie name and cookie value. So we'll just set up a few properties here. Settings, of course, defaults blank array, and we'll create another one called cookie, and we'll just set that as nullsy, and we'll set up another var, say value, and we'll say nullsy as well, and we'll come down here, and I just want to, when we pass in the controller, okay, so this is our recordings controller we just created when we baked it up, and I want to get the params, okay, but we're going to get a thing called named params. I'm going to show you how it works, don't worry. So we'll do this quickly. We'll say this cookie equals, and we'll say this controller, and we'll say params, and we'll grab the named params, and we want to grab the one named cookie. Oh, cookie, and we'll grab it. We'll do a little bit of the ternary operation here, and we'll copy this, copy, we'll throw that in, or else we'll just set it to null for that value, and we'll just do an isSet, there. So this should all make sense. So if that variable's set, we'll set it to the value of this, or else it'll get the value of null. And I'll just minimize that out. We'll just make a copy here of that line. Copy! And we'll go below it. And of course we want the value that we're going to put into our cookie. And we'll grab value here. And we'll say value here. Now, before I go any further, I want to show you something. So I'm just going to do a Control P and go into our recordings controller. And I want to turn it off so it doesn't use databases for this controller, because right now it's going to look for the recordings table, but we don't want to set that. So we can say users, and we can say null, and that will make it so it doesn't use a database table. We come up to our application and we type in recordings here. Recordings. We hit enter. Alright, we're missing methods. Alright, so haven't got the index method. So let's just create a method called toggle, which we'll use to toggle those buttons that we looked at in the HTML file. So we'll create this and we'll do that. Say toggle. And we won't pass any values there. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to include our component that we're creating. So I'm going to say components equals array, and I'm going to say recording component. And I also want to include our redirect component as well. So we'll say redirect. Alright, so let's look at the name params. Fairly simple. Jump into the application here. We want this list view and expanded view to link to our toggle action. So we'll jump back into our recordings controller and type in toggle there. And we want to set up the name params. They're just like the get variables in PHP, except they're formatted nicer. So we can set one up called cookie and give it a value of posts like that. And we can create another one, and we'll call it value, and we'll give it a value of list, because we've got list and expanded view. So we'll just hit enter on that, like that, and jump back into our application, go back into our component, and I just want to do a PR out. Now we can PR things out. It's a special function that comes with the Cake PHP framework. If you want to have a look at all the other inbuilt functions that you can use, go into the Cake directory, Cake, and open up the basics file, and you'll see them all in here. If we look at the PR function, you'll just see it's just the print R function in PHP with pre-tags around it. Alright, so we'll use that to print out this controller params, and we'll just exit out of the script underneath it. We'll come back up here and we'll do a refresh now, and you'll see that they're in the name param, so we've got access to that through that key, and we can access those values, which is how I'm getting them here. So that's what these values are when you look at them in here. So one thing we don't want people to be able to do is set up their own cookie names and values for our application. So we have to set up some sort of predefined list of cookie names and values that can be set. So to do that, let's throw that into the recordings controller's settings for the recording component, and that will allow people to customize, the component for their use. So let's just throw that in. Let's create an array, and we'll call it cookies, and we'll throw in another array. And we'll give this the name of the key for our cookie. We'll say post, and we'll say that can only have a value of list, and we'll say expanded. So now all we need to do is create a method to check that. So we'll just jump back into our component, and we'll create a private method called cookie valid, like that, and we'll tab in there. And we'll give it in the cookie and of course the value of the cookie, and we'll do a simple if test again, and we'll say is set, check that the actual cookie is set. Now remember, we set this in our settings and we called it cookies, and of course the name of our cookie. So if that's set, and we'll do an in array, check for that value, see that's in that array. We'll say value, and we'll say this settings cookies, and of course the cookie name cookie. If that's all true, we'll return true, of course, because that is a valid cookie.
or else we will return false. So I just want to show you something. Just comment out the PR there and the exit, and we'll come back into our browser and do a refresh. And you'll see that our recordings controller has a view and a layout. It auto renders that stuff out by default, which is great. But how this is going to work is we're going to click on, say, expanded view. All right, it's going to link back to here, and it's going to set the cookie post to value expanded. And then this is going to redirect us back to that page. So it's going to go back to the referring URL. Now, we don't need all this to render out. So I'm going to stop that. Any controller that uses this component won't render out a layout. So we'll come down here. We'll just comment that. We'll keep that commented out. And we'll do a startup method. All right. And this method will be ran after the actions. It's run after the initialize method. So it will happen at the end. Okay. So let's do this ampersand. And let's pass in the controller, and then let's just say controller, and we'll say auto render. We just turn that into null like that. If we come back up into here now and do a refresh, see that we get no layout or view. Alright, that's what we want because that's all that's needed for that. So I just want to show you guys something else here. Just say we're in our application and we click on list view. We'll get sent to this location and we'll get redirected back to the referring URL, which will be this page. But what happens if someone goes directly to the link? We've got nowhere to send them, so we need to set up some sort of default redirect location. So let's set up a property to handle that sort of stuff. We'll say URL redirect, and we'll just give it a value of null. But we want to make sure that it's set inside our settings, inside the controller. So we'll do an if test, and we'll say empty. Say this settings, and we'll just call it URL redirect inside there as well. So if the URL redirect is not set, let's just trigger out an error, and I've got that on shortcut there, so that shot out like a gun. It was very quick, but you can see here that it's just a message back to the user saying that they haven't defined the URL redirect, and I just typed that out. I'll just make sure that's cancelled out. There we go. And you can see that I'm just throwing in a user warning, okay, and I'm just using the trigger error function in PHP. So nothing too difficult there. And we'll just check that out now. So we go back into our application and we do a refresh. That error should get thrown. And you can see there, initialize undefined URL redirect key. So I couldn't find it and it's throwing our error. So that'll tell the user who's using this component that, hey, you have to set that up. All right. So we'll come back into our controller and do that. So alright, so before we throw that in, let's just make some room in here. Let's throw in a comma there. Come down here, and now we've got a bit of space to work with. So let's say URL redirect, and we'll give it a value of an array, and we'll say controller, and we'll say controller equals posts, and we'll say action. We'll say action will equal index. So that's where we'll send our users back to, and we'll just throw in another line return in there. So now if we come back into our browser and do a refresh, this error message disappears because we've set that up, that URL redirect in there. It gets sent in through the config param, it gets array merged onto our default settings, it's then checked for and it's there, so we don't get that error anymore. So let's just set that up, the value for that property. So we'll just come down to the bottom here and say this URL redirect, give it the value of this settings URL redirect, and that looks pretty good. Now we want to write cookies in this component, so let's include our cookie component. So we'll go in here and go components, and we'll say array, and we'll say equals cookie, and we'll just make sure that's all done, and now we can use our cookie component. So let's scroll down. My brother Luke just turned up. Both my brothers are fixing their cars right now in the driveway, or they're giving a service to my brother Troy's car right now, so you might hear some clanking and some engines and beer drinking. So let's use that component right now. Let's do function, and we'll say record, and we'll throw in the cookie name, and of course we want to get the value, and we want to get when it expires, so we'll say expires,
And we'll just say this cookie, and we'll run the write method off that component, and we'll throw in the cookie name, the value, and we'll say it's true, so it's encrypted, and when it expires, so we'll say. Alright, so now what I want to do is set up a public method we can use inside our controllers. So we'll just call this one redirect, and it's going to redirect the user back to the referring URL. So we'll grab that from the environment variables. Now I'm going to use another function from the basics.php file we looked at before when we're looking at the PR function, and this one's going to allow me to grab environment variables easier. I'm going to grab the referring URL, and I'm going to do an if test on it, and I'm going to say is set ref. We will do our redirect, and we'll redirect back to the referring URL, so redirect back to ref, and we want to run this off the controller because we're inside a component. And we'll come back up here and we'll do an else if, and we'll say is set, and better make sure it's a double S, and we'll say this URL redirect. That's set. We will do this redirect back to that location. So this URL redirect. And we just want to make sure we're running that off the controller. And what I want to do now is just create another public method, but before I go and do that, I'm going to move all the public and private methods into their own spots. So we'll move public up there, and we'll come down here for the private ones, private methods. We'll come down here and we will say privates, the private parts, they shouldn't be seen. Let's scroll up, there we go. Let's create the last method, which will be a public method as well, and we'll call this one save, and I want to pass in an expires parameter, and it doesn't have to be set, and we'll just scroll down here, but if it is set, I'm going to allow people to override this. This will allow people to override the expiry date of the cookie on the fly inside the action a lot easier. Let's do a if test in here, so we'll just do is set, and we'll say expires, and we'll set this settings, and we'll say expires equals expires, and then we just want to do a save, but we only want to save if it's a valid cookie, so we'll do another if test, and this time we'll run our cookie valid method that we created, so we'll say cookie valid, and we'll throw in the this cookie and the this value, and that will check if it's valid or not, and if it is, we want to do a this we're going to do underscores record, and we want to record that cookie, so cookie name, the cookie value, oops, better say value there, value, and of course the expiration date for our cookie. So we'll say settings and expires, and if that all works, we want to return true, or else we will return false. And that component is donesies. So well done to yourself, pat yourself on the back. We did a pretty good job there, we were pretty quick, and that's what I'm going for in this lesson, because we have to get a lot done, so we're going to have a smooth ride for the next 3 lessons after this one. So let's jump into the toggle and use this component. So we'll say if, and we'll say this, and we'll run our component, so recording, we'll say save, and of course that's going to return true if it can actually save it, and we will do a redirect, so we'll say this recording better make sure I've got that, redirect, or else we'll run our redirect component, redirect, and we'll say flash warning, and we'll say invalid toggle. I won't make that into a capital, keep that lowercase. We'll say please try again. And we'll redirect back to this recording URL redirect. All right, the property that we created. So that looks pretty good to me. I'm happy with that. Let's just check that it all works. So let's come into the browser. So just make sure you've got your cookies cleared out, and we'll just hit enter in here and see if we get redirected back to our posts index. Now this is going to send back to blog index because remember we set up our routing back in the other lesson. So that all seemed to work, which is totally awesome. And now we'll just go to tools, options, we'll check our cookies, and you can see that we've got one set, and you can see that we've set a cookie for the cookie post. So that totally worked, which is totally awesome. But if we come back here like this, and we were to say tools, clear private data, and we say cookies, and we clear it all out, cookies, and we try and throw in an invalid cookie or even value like that, we're going to get redirected back, and it's going to tell us invalid toggle, please try again. So that totally works. That is totally awesome. It's all working. Well done to you. We're going to now move on to creating the helpers for our links here, and then we'll move on to our tag. So it's going to be a good end to the lesson. Alright, so now we can write our cookies. We need some way to read them inside our views. So we need to create a cookie helper. Cake PHP doesn't come with a cookie helper, so we need to create it. Now we're going to have to do not really any hacking, but we're going to use the cookie component, which has a read method on it inside our helper. So we're going to have to import it in because you don't usually use components inside your helpers, so there's no components property inside your helper to include that. So we have to go with app import, which is a static method, and it just runs off the class instead of running off the object. So let's just jump in here and do that. So we'll go to the helpers directory and create a new helper. We'll call it cookie. Make sure that says PHP and not whatever that just said, and we'll start up PHP, and we just want to say new helper, and we want to call it cookie, and we want to do our app import, and we're going to import it. It's a component, so we throw in component, and we just need to say what component we're going to import, which is cookie, and this is all mapped in Cake, so Cake will automatically find it in the Cake directory. And we'll just come down here and we just want to create one public method that we'll be able to use in our views called read. It's just going to read the key and give back the value of the cookie. And you can see here that when we create this read public method, before we can read the cookie, we have to set the cookie component's key property to the value of the config read security salt. The security salt is a random string that lives in config core PHP. Its purpose is to keep our app's data secure, and without it we won't be able to read our encrypted cookies. So if you want to have a look at that, you can go into cookies, config, and go into core and scroll down, and you'll see this string down here that is random, alright, and that's our key to access our data. So no other applications can get to that data without this key. So let's jump in here and do this. So we just have to instantiate a new cookie component. So we'll say new cookie component, and then we just want to run cookie key property and just set that to configure read, and we want to set it to the security salt. So we'll say security.salt, and that will get that value from inside our config file. And again, it's using a static method off the config class. So let's set up, get the value back. So we'll say value equals cookie read. Of course, it's going to read the key, and we'll say if it's set value, we'll return that value, return value, or else we'll return false.
So that should make sense to you guys. It's just going to read in the key. We're going to use the cookie component, which we're importing here. You guys have used includes before in PHP, so there's not much difference. The only difference is that this is mapped to our core directory, component directory, where we can get the cookie component. And we're just going to run that and read in the cookie. If it's got a value, we return it back, or else we return false. So the next thing we need to do is create a custom helper that interacts with our cookies set in the recording component, and this will allow us to access our cookies set by the recordings component in our views. We're going to include the HTML helper and the cookie helper using the recording helper helpers property. This will give us access to the HTML helper and our custom cookie helper inside our custom recording helper. Whoa, that sounds really complicated, but it's actually really easy. Create a recordings helper toggle link method, and we're going to make it public so we'll be able to use it in our views. This will create a toggle link method we can use in our views. It uses HTML helper to create the link and checks the value of the cookie to see if the link should have the HTML class attribute active. So we can change the style sheet on that and change the color of it, which you can see here. So very simple. Let's do that right now. Alright, so just jump into the helpers directory and create a new helper, and we'll call this one recording.php, and we'll start PHP up again, and we'll come down here, whoop, and we'll create a new helper, and we're going to call this one recording. And we just want to set up the property helpers, so we can include these helpers that we want to use inside our custom helper. And one of the helpers I want to use is the HTML helper, and I also want to use our custom cookie helper that we created. And we'll come down here, we just need to create one method. It's not going to be anything too fancy, it's just going to be called toggle link, and we'll just pass in a name, a cookie, and a value. We'll come down here and we just want to grab the cookie value and create a new variable, and we'll say this cookie read. So we're using our custom method that we created, and we'll say cookie. It's going to read that. Alright, and we also have to set up an URL we're going to send them to when they click on the link. So we'll say controller, and we'll say recordings, of course, and we need to send them to an action, and we set up the toggle action. So we'll say toggle, and I also want to set up another parameter here called admin, and I'm going to set this value to 0 because I don't want them to get redirected back to, on our address up here, admin recordings. I want them to go back to the default recordings toggle. If I don't leave on that 0, they're going to get redirected back to admin recordings toggle, which doesn't exist. Alright, so let's go back in here and we'll continue along. Also want to pass in the name parameters, so we'll say cookie colon, and we'll concat the value or the name of the cookie, and we'll also do that for the value, and we'll say value there, and we'll just make sure we've got a semicolon on the end there. And we also want to set up our attribute so we can check if it's active or not, so you can see here whether we've got our class active on that or not. So we'll just come in back into our code here, and we'll just throw in a little bit of a comparison here to check. So we'll say value. So if this value we're passing in here is equal to the cookie value, we will make it active. So we'll say cookie value. We'll say array, and we'll say class equals active. Or else we'll just say equals null, and then we want to return our link, so we say return, and we'll say this, and we'll run our HTML helper that we included up there. So we'll say HTML, we'll say link, and we'll say name, and we'll say URL, and we'll pass in the attributes. Alright, so that looks pretty good. It's pretty self-explanatory, not too complicated. Very simple indeed. So let's try this method out now inside our views. Hello, just jumping in here to make another correction. I don't want to put the colons on like that. I just want to do normal keys and values. Cake will automatically default and turn these into name params, so there's no need to do all of that extra stuff. So just like that, and these will become name params. And I also want to add in one more parameter to this method to make it a little bit more flexible. I want to call this parameter active and set its default value to false. And just come down here, we'll add in another condition. We'll say or active. Now what this will do is, if we set this to true, it will set our link to be active. So we'll be able to set a default active link if we need to, and we will do in the last lesson. So just making our method more flexible. Alright, so let's just include our freshly built helper. We called it recording, so let's just include it in. And now we can access that using the recording variable inside our views. So if we go into the admin index, we'll just go underneath the heading there, and we'll create a new paragraph. And I'll also just throw in a couple of line breaks down here just to separate it a little bit more. I think I can do a control enter to get a line break. No, I can't. There we go. That looks pretty cool. And we'll just throw in a an echo here, and I want to echo out the recording helper toggle link method. And we just want to throw in the name for our link, which will be a list view for this link. And we want to throw in the cookie name, which will be posts. And of course we want to throw in the value, and for this one it will be list. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to concat a bit of a spacing on there, and we'll just minimize that, and we'll make a copy of this. Just go copy, and we'll just throw this in here like that, and we'll just change this to expanded, and make sure this says expanded as well. Expanded, and we'll just get the spacing off the end of there like that, and we'll come back into our application, do a refresh, and we'll test this out. So we click on list view, we get redirected back to here. We click on page source. I'll just minimize this so we can see it in the screen, and you can see that it's active because we clicked on it, whereas the other one is not active. And if we click on expanded and we go to view page source, we can see that that is active. So that is all working. Now I was going to finish off the taggable behavior in this lesson, but I think I'm going to leave that to the next lesson because we're running close to an hour right now, and I don't want the lessons to go over an hour because it's just too much. So all of us will go and take a break now. It's well deserved. I know this is a very fast-paced course, and it's highly edited down, so it's very, very quick. As always though, if you're having trouble, come onto the forum, but I'm pretty sure if you followed all the other lessons, it's fine. So thanks again for your company. Can't wait till lesson number 6. We'll create the taggable behavior and do a whole heap of other stuff with our models that's going to blow your minds.
Hey guys, it's Lee's brother, Elmac, from Down Under. I don't know what he does. Looks a bit weird to me. I'll give you back to the person that knows more about it. Freaks me out. Nerds.
That's my older brother Luke. He's from Down Under as well, as you can probably tell. And he's outside right now mending a car with my brother Troy. And I had to tell him to be quiet because I can't have any noise. Nah, I'm only joking. You don't have to be that quiet. I just don't want, I'm trying to make these lessons more professional. Like, Troy's not drunk out in the backyard anymore. Well, you were drunk out in the backyard yesterday. Alright, we will continue with the lesson now. So that is my brother Luke. Now you've met both brothers. Luke is a ginormous man. Alright, let's do this.